This week on Raising Black Millionaires, we're taking you to Houston, Texas, the home of the Turkey Leg Hut and the Twisted Grilled Cheese restaurants, and corporations such as Taylor Construction Management and the Lewis Group LLP. But Houston is also known as the birthplace of music royalty Solange and Beyonce Knowles. So we took a trip to H-Town to talk to the father of these two brilliant women to find out how he and Miss Tina raised them to become business moguls. So it's really good to sit down and talk to you today. So thank you for allowing us to converse today.
Well, thank you, Tia, and thank you for bringing your team here, and welcome to Houston.
Thanks, I appreciate that. So I want to just jump in. I really love starting these talks, getting to know a little bit about your background, your home life growing up. Can you tell me a little bit and shed some light on your social, economic condition growing up, what home life was like?
You know, oddly enough, I was just in Huntsville, Alabama, just yesterday at Alabama A&M, HBCU, as you know, as a guest keynote speaker for a speakers series for the School of Business. And I had the opportunity to share what I'm about to say right now. So I was born in Gaston, Alabama, a little small town, 30,000 people. I was born in 1952, so that tells you how old I am, 68.
Yes, indeed.
And, you know, my mother, her name was Lou Helen Hogue, H-O-G-U-E. My grandparents have Cherokee in their background.
Lineage,
and so my mother, she grew up in Marion, Alabama. She went to high school with Coretta King and Andrew Young's wife. And oddly, Andrew Young and Martin Luther King would marry these two ladies from Marion, Alabama, which is about 15 miles from Selma. But you know, my mother, when she came to Gaston, Alabama, she had the bug about desegregation and integration. My dad, slightly younger, by 6-7 years than my mom.
Than your mom?
Yes. And my mom had a first marriage. And my dad was her second marriage. And I have an older brother who's now deceased. That was from my mother's first marriage. And by the way, I talk about this whole story I'm about to talk to you about in my second book, Racism from the Eyes of a Child.
In October of 2015, Dr. Knowles released his first book, The DNA of Achievers, 10 Traits of Highly Successful Professionals. His sophomore book, Racism from the Eyes of a Child, was released in 2017 and followed by the 2018 and 2019 releases of the books The Emancipation of Slavery Through Music and Public Relations and Media, PR Strategies for the Digital Age.
And so, you know, my mother was very strong, very outspoken, especially about segregation. And as a result of that, I never went to a black school. I desegregated. We're talking in the 50s. We're talking the 50s. All the way through college up to the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, Gaston High, Litchfield Junior High. And so my dad was a truck driver. He drove produce for a produce company. My dad only made $30 a week. He only had a third grade education, and his running joke is that the first day he went to school, the teacher didn't show up. The second day, the books didn't show up. And the third day, the damn school burned down. So that was his running joke. But, you know, my dad convinced the owners of the trucking company to let him have the truck 24/7 every day. And he would go and tear down old houses and sell all the metals and the wood, the lumber. It was pretty standard in the South. People would their car would break down, they would just leave it wherever it broke down. If it broke down in the street, they would leave it. In the yard, they would leave it. And so he would buy these cars and pay $20 for them, and then he would sell all the parts, the tires, everything. So, you know, when you see Sanford and Son, that's how our house looked.
Really?
Just like that.
Wow, wow.
You know, lumber, metals, tires stacked up, batteries.
Because all of that equated to potential money.
And he actually made more money doing that than the $30 he made a week driving the truck.
Well, he was investing almost all of his weekly income to get it, huh? To get the cars.
And he taught me entrepreneurship at a very early age. And so did my mother. My mother was what they called a colored maid.
Okay.
And she made $3 a day, so she made $15 a week. You know, think about that. $45 a week my parents made.
Family.
But my mother, on their jobs, they made $45, and they took that $45 and reinvested it. Because my mother convinced the white woman she was a maid for and her friends to give them and give her any apparel, anything that was material.
Really?
Sheets, pillowcases, whatever it was. Old hand-me-down clothes, and her best two girlfriends, my mom and her best two girlfriends, on the weekends would sew and make these beautiful quilts and sell them. And I think, you know, we've heard about these quilts in the South that these women, well, my mom, that's what she did. And occasionally on the weekend, when I was younger, as I got older, that changed, but occasionally they would ask me to help thread the needle. As their eyes were getting bad. And so I would go in there and thread the needles for them. But to see this big square wood thing and all in a living room, they'd move the furniture out, and it was a sight to see. And a beautiful piece of art, because I also looked back and I realized there was a piece of art. And so they would sell those and those quilts. And that's how my parents made their real income, was not from their day jobs, we'll call it day jobs, it was from their entrepreneurship. So I saw that as a child. I shared just yesterday with the young minds at Alabama A&M, I grew up on a dirt road. We had an outside bathroom. Call it an outhouse in the South until I was about 14. And I always marvel at the fact, out of gratitude and being humble, and I tell my audience, if I can grow up on a dirt road and with an outside bathroom, parents were not educated, but they were entrepreneurs. Like, what excuse does anyone else have?
Yeah, that's right.
And so that was my beginning, was a humble beginning. But my family had a lot of love. My dad, they all worked extremely hard, had determination. I wouldn't say that was their passion, the things that they did. I think they did it out of determination and love. Of family. And I talk about sometimes we get confused with determination versus passion.
So I'm wondering, because you as an adult are able to tell me that my dad made $20 a week and $30 a week, and he took $20 and used it to essentially invest in stuff.
Buying a car.
Were you told this as a child? Was your parents' income each week something that was just generally discussed in the family? Was it common knowledge for you? Or did you learn it later?
It was common knowledge, because I would sometimes occasionally go with my dad to some of these houses he was tearing down. My dad, though, he would always bring his money that he made from work and give it to my mother.
Got it.
All of it.
Got it.
And my mother would then pay the bills.
She would manage it.
Yeah, she would manage that part of the family. So that was not his responsibility. He would take out a few dollars for himself, but he would give that all to my mother to manage.
So his job was primarily to make it, and then he would just turn it over for her to manage it.
And he was a good man. My dad had at one point 3 jobs, actually 4, because he worked at Gaston State Trade School, Technical Trade School, as a security guard at night. And now I understand this, because quite frankly, he probably was getting paid while he was sleeping, because he worked at night.
Got it.
And it was a small junior college with maybe 4 or 5 buildings. And his job was just to go around at night. But I'm sure that he probably, because he had to be at his day job at 5 o'clock at the Stamps and Company to drive that produce truck, normally to Birmingham, Alabama and back. And then he would tear down the houses or pick up the cars. But there was a 4th thing my dad did. He was a volunteer fireman.
Firefighter,
in Gaston.
Okay.
And I remember him, the days he was off from the junior college, he would be up at night, because he was accustomed to being up at night, listening to these CB radios to see if there was a fire somewhere.
Yeah, just from home?
Yeah, from home.
Okay.
But it showed me also what his thoughts and beliefs were, and taught me a sense of community. And what that meant to give back to the community.
You know, you mentioned in the beginning of, I believe it was in the beginning of your most recently released book, Destiny's Child, The Untold Story. With the 2019 release of his book, Destiny's Child, The Untold Story, Dr. Knowles released a companion album called Destiny's Child, The Untold Story Presents Girls Time, featuring 15 tracks of never-before-heard recordings from the beginning of Destiny's Child, when they were known as Girls Time. You mentioned how you and Miss Tina had come out of poverty, essentially, right? And I'm interested in knowing, with this picture, because we're going to come back to your father's charitable acts in just a moment, but I'm interested in knowing what was your journey coming from the young man who experienced growing up in that condition of poverty, right? But still with plenty of promise, because you constantly saw your parents working, constantly making a way out of no way.
And I never knew I was poor. I never knew I was poor until I became an adult. And I look back and I was like, we were poor as hell. But I never knew that.
Okay.
When it came Christmas, I got the new line bicycle. I got the new gas BB gun. I got the racing car kit the first years they came out. I never knew I was poor.
Did you know that through seeing the way other people lived and their experiences? How did you end up finding out or realizing that you were poor?
Oh, when I was in my 20s.
Okay.
When I became an adult.
Yeah, and when you started making your own.
Yeah, we're talking the 20s.
Okay.
And you kind of look back and you see, wow, I didn't know. So it was much later in life.
Now, when you were in your, let's go like to your teens, were you required, many of the people I interview, they were at some point in their early teens required to get a job?
Absolutely.
Was that
wasn't required
really?
to get a job. I wanted to get a job. So my first company was in the 3rd grade.
Tell me
I was
about
in Catholic school, and I came up with this idea that I would sell candy.
Okay.
I had $1, and there was a store 3 blocks, now that I think about it, 3 blocks from the school, that I would pass by because I used to catch the bus because we lived in East Gaston and this was in Gaston. And I would catch the bus and I would pass the store and I would go and buy candy. Now, I never told my mother this, but I would buy $1 worth of candy and then I would sell it and I would make $3. And then finally I made my first $10 and I went to the store owner and I said, look, I need to get more than you normally when I have $1. He said, how do you know that, young man? I said, it just makes sense. Now I'm spending $10. He laughed, he says, you're gonna do well one day. But the nuns found out about 2 months later.
And they shut you down.
And shut me down, and I had to write on the board 100 times. You know the drill of that. But that was my first, I call it my first company.
But wait, we have to rewind for a minute because we understand that there's a concept called a common sense, right? That they say isn't always too common. And the way you explained that, it was as if you just figured, it just made good sense to you that if I'm buying all this candy, I need to be able to get some closer to wholesale prices so that you could really leverage your investment, right? Was that?
It was instinctive, but I'm sure it was also the subconscious of hearing that and seeing that in my family.
Got it.
You have to remember, well, you wouldn't remember this, but you have to know that my grandfather, Dave Hogue, is my idol.
How so? Why?
Because this man, he lived in Marion, Alabama. He had 300 acres of land that he owned. To this day, nobody can figure out, and we've researched how did he acquire this 300 acres of land. We don't know. Wow. But he was genius. Let me tell you what my granddad would do. He would lease out a parcel, let's call it 100 acres of land, to the paper mill. They would go then and cut the trees so that they could make the paper, clear the land for him, and he would go behind them and farm. I mean, that is absolutely genius. He got paid for them clearing off the land that he needed to farm. I just still look back at this and say, God, it was genius. But you know, my grandfather also was the regional moonshine distributor.
Okay.
And I had never in my life, me and my first cousin, we would go every summer because we were so excited to go to Marion to spend the summer with our granddaddy. And because he would spend time with us, taught me how to shoot a rifle, we would go fishing. He was a really kind man, and 6'5", just dressed just always sharp. So we were there one summer, and there was a knock on the door on a Saturday morning, and we were in the front bedroom, and we could see out the door, and here were these two white men, and they said, "Is Mr. Hogue here?" You should have seen us. We were like, "Ah, did you hear that? They just called Granddaddy Mr.
Hogue."
We had never heard a white man call a black man Mr. That was the first time I ever heard a white man say that. So I just go backwards just to say that my grandfather also had a remarkable impact on me. Just the time he spent with me. My dad didn't spend a lot of time with me because he was working 3 jobs. So my grandfather spent a lot of time with me. There was a minister in Gaston, Reverend B.L. Walker, when my parents first got married. And it was customary in the South that you would have a new married couple that would just rent a bedroom from someone who had a house.
Oh, really? Okay.
That was pretty customary in the South.
Okay.
And so my parents used to live at his house. Okay. And he was the established minister in the city, and he would often just sit with me and mentor me and talk. He would literally, I think, when I look back, use me as the guinea pig for writing his sermon on Sundays.
Okay.
So I had a pocket of role models
Sounds like it.
that instilled in me certain principles.
Yeah, it sounds like you had your own in community set of mentors and coaches. It sounds like
I did.
That's awesome. So if we can just jump ahead just a little bit before we come back, I've heard you say in another interview how you and their mother raised the two of them to be entrepreneurs, that you were very intentional about that. Now, when I hear you talk about how you got into entrepreneurship, it sounds like it was just something that was a part of who you were from the environment that was set up. Can you tell me more about how the two of you were intentional, what you did to set them up, to groom them to be entrepreneurs?
Sure. You know, Tina's background almost mimicked mine's totally.
Really?
She grew up on a dirt road in Galveston.
Okay.
In and a half street. You know, they had those half streets in Galveston. Her parents were poor. Her dad was a longshoreman. He was from New Iberia, Louisiana. But in Galveston, he was, they had those longshoremen there. That was a fairly decent job.
Yeah.
But they had 6 kids. 6 kids total. Tina's mother was a stay-at-home mom, but she was a seamstress.
Okay.
And she made clothes, and that's how she brought in additional income. So they lived in a home almost identical of mine. You know, it wasn't anything fancy by any stretch of the imagination. And you know, she grew up poor, like I did. But similarly, never knew she was poor. Saw her mother be an entrepreneur. I'm not sure if her dad did something else that I'm not sure.
Okay.
But the question was, did we instill that entrepreneurial spirit? It's absolutely yes, because the first years of our marriage, Tina was a stay-at-home mom. And then 6 years into the marriage, and we had both daughters, Beyonce and Solange, I went to her and I said, Tina, what is your passion? The thing I ask my students, and I go around the world lecturing about, what is your passion? What is the DNA of achievers? What are the traits of achievers? And it starts with passion.
Yeah.
And then she said, well, my passion is I love doing hair and clothes and beauty and fashion. And I said, well, why don't you go get your cosmetology license, and you'll never work for anyone. We will start our own business. And that's what we did.
Okay. And so getting back to how you were very intentional about rearing the children to be entrepreneurial, do you think that it was just simply because they saw you all open the salon and they saw the way you moved around in and even grew in your entrepreneurship?
It was purely lifestyle. That's the lifestyle that they grew up, similar to me.
Okay.
It was the lifestyle. Nobody said, hey, these are the principles of entrepreneurship. It wasn't that type of thing.
Okay.
When anybody said, oh, one day you'll own your company, it was just the lifestyle of living in a home where your parents were entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And that becomes part of your ethos and belief system.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I love the fact that you mentioned passion, because it's obvious to me, and I think it should be obvious to anyone who observes you. You are clearly a man living in your passion at every moment, it seems. And I'm wondering what your journey was, going from someone who was brought up poor, even though you didn't know, going to or becoming someone who lives a life that is solely dictated by your passions, knowing that there are plenty of people today who would love to just experience for a moment what it's like to live life, making a living, doing whatever their passion is, but perhaps they don't see that even as a possibility because they're too busy surviving, right? So I'm really curious as to how you transitioned from being someone who perhaps took jobs. I remember reading about you taking a job when you were around 18 that you didn't enjoy. I want to say it was at...
You just stole my line of how I started out my
Did I do that?
lecture yesterday at Alabama A&M.
Because I pay attention.
I like that. I'm impressed.
Thank you.
You actually read. So I told a story when I was 18, in between my freshman year at University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. In Gaston, we had the largest Goodyear plant, as well as the largest steel plant back then. Very industrial town. And I used to cure what's called flaps, which is this rubber that goes between the rim and the tire on these big trucks. And to cure a flap is 700 degrees when these ovens open. And so you're in a t-shirt and shorts because it's hot.
Indeed.
But that little rubber would kind of come off and it would burn the heck out of you. It kept you alert. And I use that example that I didn't wake up every day saying I can't wait to go to Goodyear. It wasn't my passion, it was a job. But I think some people, you made a comment that some people don't get the opportunity to live their passion. It's because they haven't identified their passion. I think each of us have something that we have a burning desire to do. I don't think a lot of people have identified what that is. And then even if they do, they are confused about instant gratification and microwave success, that it requires time to get to this point. I didn't just start out one day with all of this.
But how did you identify your passion?
I had to ask, what is that one thing that I absolutely love doing? That if someone said you could only do this in life, what would that be? And that's to educate for me now today and the difference.
In 1974, Mathew Knowles graduated from Fisk University with a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics and a Bachelor of Science degree in business administration. He later obtained an MBA in strategic planning and organizational culture and a PhD in business administration from Cornerstone Christian Bible College, making him Dr. Mathew Knowles.
You know, as we get older in our lives, and passions can change.
Sure.
But today, my passion is to educate, and to motivate in 3 areas. It used to be 2, but entrepreneurship and music business, and now health and wellness.
Really?
Just based on personal experiences that I've had in the last 6 months.
Yeah. So I think you hit on something. I think that a lot of times we're not brought up in an environment that helps us to identify our passions. But you and Miss Tina had to have been very intentional about helping Beyonce and Solange identify their passions.
We were.
Can you please share with me?
We were very intentional.
What did you do? How did you help them to identify that?
Well, we had the same belief system that it wasn't about what we wanted. Similar to how I had asked Tina one day, what is it you love doing? It was about what our kids enjoyed. So as a parent, and I still believe in this, that our jobs as parents is to surround our kids and help them to identify what it is they do love. And you surround them with many, many things, and you look and pay attention to what they gravitate toward. And I had this philosophy. If you have a son that you think as a parent his passion is softball, and you have to tell him to go to practice, the first time you tell him to go to practice, it becomes a hobby, not a passion. never has Solange or Beyonce asked me. I had to ask them rather. Never have I had to ask Beyonce and Solange, it's time to go to practice. They always would be bugging the hell out of me, like, Daddy, we got to be at practice on time.
Wow, I think that's helpful because you have even in my experience, you know, I've seen, even with my husband, he's probably going to kill me for sharing this, but with our youngest son, I remember when he identified that boy was great at baseball. I mean, he just is, and he would be that sports parent who would just do too much.
Yeah.
But it was clear when there was that moment when he was very inspired and loved what he was doing, and when that moment passed, it was very obvious that it had passed. And so obviously his passion had changed.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Well, the other thing I always say, had Beyonce or Solange came to me and said, Daddy, you know, I want to be a doctor, then I would have said, that's great. You go to med school. When you finish, Daddy would have bought a hospital. Think about that. That's what's always our thought process.
Yeah.
You get this information, then we'll buy what's required so you can fulfill that.
Yeah. So it sounds like you were always, perhaps not even with words or consciously, talking or teaching ownership, right? That's what it sounds like to me. Is that accurate?
Right, it
Okay.
is. And kids, you know, kids learn from parents, not always what we say, but what we do.
Yeah.